June 10th, 1944, near the hedgerows of Normandy. The air hums with the sound of distant artillery and the faint whine of aircraft far above. Smoke curls lazily over the shattered French countryside, where a group of German tankers from the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, crouch beside their Panzer IVs, sharing cigarettes and stories. Oberfeldwebel Karl Weiss smirks as he watches an Allied column moving in the valley below. A line of olive-drab tanks, their rounded turrets and boxy hulls crawling across the fields. Amerikanische Spielzeugpanzer, he says. American toy tanks. His crew chuckles. They've heard of the M4 Sherman. Under-armored, undergunned, prone to catching fire when hit. They call it Tommy Cooker, the tank that burns. Moments later, the men climb back into their panzers. The order has come. Move to intercept. The Germans know their 75mm high-velocity guns will punch through the Shermans like paper. The field is open, perfect for ambush. The heavy treads bite into the soil as Weiss's panzer rolls into position beneath the cover of trees. Through his commander's periscope, Weiss watches the Americans advance, cautious yet determined. The lead Sherman crests the hill. The German gunner whispers, "Range 800 meters." The first shot tears through the Sherman's armor. A burst of flame follows. The crew inside has no chance. Weiss allows himself a cold smile. "See?" he says. "They never learn." But what Weiss doesn't see yet, what none of them see, is the endless line stretching miles back toward the beaches. More Shermans? Dozens. Hundreds. For every one that burns, 2 more are rolling onto the continent. The laughter will not last long. In the days that follow, German tank crews begin to realize something is different about these Americans. Their tanks might be simple, even crude, but they are everywhere. The fields of Normandy are filling with them, and when one goes up in flames, another appears before the smoke clears. Still, the Germans fight fiercely. Their panzers are superior one-on-one, their optics sharper, their shells deadlier. But even the best machine is only as strong as the numbers behind it. And as the panzer divisions retreat, slowly, yard by yard, they begin to understand. This is not the same enemy they faced in 1942. In the hedgerows of France, the Sherman's true weapon is revealed. Not just its gun, but the industrial giant that built it. Thousands of miles away from the battlefields of France, the rumble of engines and the clang of steel echoed across the American heartland. Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, cities transformed into forges of war. Conveyor belts rolled day and night, welding sparks lighting the cavernous factories like fireworks. Inside the Ford Motor Company's massive Willow Run plant, men and women worked shoulder to shoulder. Some had never seen a tank before the war. Now they were building one every 20 minutes. Rows of Sherman stood like green sentinels, their hulls gleaming under fluorescent lights. A foreman shouted over the roar of machinery, "Keep it moving! Next one's bound for France!" Back in Normandy, German intelligence reports began to whisper of the scale of American production. By late 1944, the United States had built over 50,000 Shermans. Each one was simple enough for a mechanic to fix in the field, yet reliable enough to fight day after day. The Americans didn't need to make the best tank, only enough of them to never run out. Oberfeldwebel Weiss and his crew, now entrenched outside Caen, were starting to see the effects firsthand. Each time they destroyed a Sherman, another appeared, sometimes 2. The panzers would strike, retreat, reload, and strike again, but it was like fighting the tide. The enemy didn't break, it multiplied. One afternoon, Weiss's radio crackled. Desperate voices from neighboring units. Allied air cover was pounding the German supply lines. Fuel was running low. The once proud panzer divisions were now rationing ammunition. Above them, the thunder of P-47 Thunderbolts filled the sky, hunting anything that moved. And always below came the Shermans. They rolled through the fields with infantry riding on their hulls, their engines growling in unison like a mechanical chorus. Some bore names scrawled in white paint. Betty Lou, Death Dealer, Texas Belle. They were crude, they were mass-produced, and they were unstoppable. For Weiss and many like him, the laughter from the early days had long since faded. There was only exhaustion now, and the grim understanding that Germany could no longer match this enemy's strength. In the end, the Sherman was not just a tank. It was a symbol of a nation's capacity to turn steel, sweat, and ingenuity into victory. The hills near Falaise were thick with the smell of diesel and death. Burnt armor littered the countryside, twisted hulks of Panzers and Shermans alike smoldering under the harsh summer sun. The German 7th Army was trapped, encircled by the Allies in what would come to be known as the Falaise Pocket. Oberfeldwebel Karl Weiss stood atop his battered Panzer IV, the paint scorched, the tracks caked with mud. He hadn't slept properly in days. His radio operator was gone, killed in an airstrike 2 nights before. Every road out was a graveyard of wrecks. The Luftwaffe had vanished from the skies, and on the horizon the dust clouds rose again. He raised his binoculars. It wasn't just a few tanks this time. It was a sea of them. Column after column advancing methodically, supported by infantry, artillery, and the constant growl of aircraft overhead. The Allies didn't charge recklessly, they moved with purpose, slowly tightening the noose. Inside one of those tanks across the field, Sergeant William Carter of the U.S. 2nd Armored Division adjusted his headset and peered through the periscope. "Panzers at 11 o'clock, he said calmly. His gunner nodded. The 75mm cannon roared, the shell streaking through the haze and slamming into a German half-track. The Shermans were learning by using their numbers, coordination, and communication to dominate the field. Weiss's gunner fired back, striking one Sherman square in the hull. Flames erupted instantly. For a brief moment, the German crew cheered. But then, a chilling sight. 5 more Shermans emerged from the smoke, spreading out, flanking, moving like a pack of predators that had learned how to hunt. Weiss realized then what he had refused to believe for months. This war wasn't being won by the strongest or the fastest. It was being won by the ones who never stopped coming. The Americans could afford to lose tanks. Germany could not. As night fell over Falaise, the German positions crumbled. Entire panzer units abandoned their vehicles, fleeing on foot under the cover of darkness. Weiss and the few survivors of his company destroyed their own tank, the last act of defiance before surrender. He took one final look at the burning valley below, the silhouettes of Sherman tanks rolling forward under the moonlight, and muttered quietly, "Wire hadn't kinda chance. We never stood a chance." The laughter that had begun in Normandy was now gone, replaced by the cold silence of realization. As the Allied advance pushed through France and into Belgium, the M4 Sherman had become the face of victory. From Normandy's hedgerows to the fields outside Aachen, its silhouette rolled across the continent like a steel tide. Soldiers joked that you could hear them before you saw them, the deep, rhythmic hum of 1,000 engines moving as one. In the ruins of a captured French farmhouse, U.S. Army engineers worked through the night, patching up damaged Shermans with whatever they could find. Spare parts from wrecks, scrap metal, even pieces of farm equipment. And the next morning, those same tanks were back in action. That was the genius of the Sherman. It didn't need to be perfect, it needed to work. Back in Germany, factory floors stood silent. Bombing raids had reduced the once proud industrial centers to rubble. The Panther and Tiger, marvels of engineering that took months to build, required rare materials and demanded expert mechanics. The Sherman, by contrast, was built in 10 factories by men and women who had never worn a uniform. It could be shipped, assembled, repaired, and replaced with astonishing ease. Captured German officers couldn't believe it when they were shown films of American assembly lines, tanks rolling off conveyor belts like cars. One officer reportedly muttered, "If we had that, we would have ruled the world." But they didn't, and that made all the difference. As autumn turned to winter, the Sherman continued to evolve. Newer variants, like the M4A3E8 Easy 8, boasted improved suspension, thicker armor, and the powerful 76mm gun, finally capable of challenging German tanks head-on. Yet even then, American commanders never relied on the Sherman alone. They combined it with artillery, aircraft, and coordination, a symphony of logistics that Germany could no longer match. By the time the Allies crossed the Rhine, the once mocked machine had become a legend. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't invincible, but it endured. And in war, endurance often matters more than perfection. For men like Oberfeldwebel Karl Weiss, now a prisoner in an Allied camp, that truth was hard to accept. Watching American tanks roll by, clean, freshly painted, and endless, he finally understood what had doomed his army. Not the bravery of the soldiers, not the skill of the commanders, but the sheer, unrelenting force of industry, organization, and will.